Hello and welcome to A Question of Property. My name is Lucia France and I'm your host for today. And we are joined by our regular panel of experts. We have John Howard, our property expert of more than 40 years, unbelievably, author of 3 different books on the subject, including Buying and Selling at Auction, the most recent one. And I believe you're working on a 4th, aren't you, John?
Yes, it's all gone off to, someone accused me of having a ghostwriter. Fancy me having a ghostwriter.
Shocking.
No such thing, but it's gone to a lady called Vanessa who oversees them and puts it in the right order and tells me what I can say and can't say in case I get sued by someone.
Right.
As you know, I'm a little bit outspoken sometimes, and she does the index.
Just sometimes.
Yeah.
Some of the time. Introducing Stefano Lucatello as well, who is Senior Partner at Cobalt Law International Property Lawyers and our international and European property expert. So Stefano, you've got your book as well, haven't you, while we're on the subject of books?
There it is.
There it is.
There it is. Yes, selling well. It's almost an Amazon bestseller, like my colleague, Mr. Paul.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, and last but by no means least, Paul Mahoney, our best-selling author, award-winning property speaker and head of Nova Financial Group. Have you put the book there as well, Paul?
Here it is. I didn't need to write 4. 1 was good enough.
Me too, Paul.
Very
Me too.
funny, very funny. Yeah.
I didn't even write 1, so there we go. Okay. Right, well, let's start with Stefano today. We've got quite a lot of questions for you here. So you mentioned, I think, in a previous episode, how much difference the value of currency can make to any purchase or sale of a property abroad. How would I be able to hedge this problem going forward?
Well, I think, which is one of the chapters in my book, actually, is why I held it up.
Oh,
one of the things that you must always look at when buying property abroad and must consider in your budget, as well as legal fees, taxation, everything else, is the rate of exchange and what's going to happen or what is happening. Now, most of us are not people who follow the markets. So as such, we dip into them as and when. Some people never dip into them because they never have the opportunity to make this sort of transaction. But you must be able to hedge your bet in some way, shape or form. I mean, you can do all sorts of things. The first thing I'd say to you is always avoid mainstream or mainline banks. Don't go to your Lloyds, to your Barclays, to your all everything. Why? Because even though they may say that they charge you no commission, what they do is they make up for the no commission by giving you a lesser rate, because banks, have got to make money some way. So the fact that they're not charging you commission is a correlation to the fact that they will give you less points and on your exchange. So what I would always go to is an FX trader, an FX company. I mean, we use a company called TorFX, TORFX, and they're based down in Devon, and they're brilliant. And they will give you a rate on the day, and they'll spread it. So they'll give you a range, and out of that range, they will give you a fixed rate. Or what you can do is you can say, right, okay, I have no intention of buying at the moment. I know the pound's a bit weak or a bit strong, whatever which way it's going. I'd like to fix the rate. So you can forward buy, and you can forward buy up to a period of 24 months usually. So what will happen is that you will say, let's say you want to forward buy 200,000 euros. You will pay the FX company usually 10% up front, and then you will pay the balance when the contract, because you enter into a monetary contract, you'll pay the balance when the contract matures in 23, 24 months time. So that's the way to deal with things. If not, I mean, lately, of course, because of Corona and all the rest of it, I've got clients who are buying abroad at the moment, and one client who's buying in Nice has actually, he's like Paul, he's a broker up in Manchester, a mortgage broker, and he's very conscious of what the markets are doing, and he's put his purchase on hold at the moment. He hasn't forward bought. He hadn't thought of forward buying, strange enough for a broker, and he hadn't thought of using an FX company. So now I put him onto our company, and they've given him the ability to forward buy and fixed a rate now for 24 months. Now, of course, fixing a rate has its pluses and its negatives, because, of course, if the pound weakens, you've got an advantage. If it strengthens, you've got a disadvantage. But, at least you know how much you are in for before doing it. Many people don't do it, and many people lose out. I had a client who bought 2 years ago in Cannes. He forward bought for 500,000 euros, and he saved, we saved him, because I put him through the same company, we saved him £15,000. He would have had, he went to his own bank, he was about to do a deal with them, we stopped him from doing the deal, and it was one of the main 5 banks, and he saved £15,000. You know, it's money that you are paying someone for not doing anything. They all do the same job at the end of the day. They all use the same platforms. It's however much you can get out of people. And what I'd say is this: even though we go with one company, we always play one off against the other. We always go to 2 companies. One of the big ones like Money Corp or whatever. You know, we always say to our lot, you know, we've gone to Money Corp, they're giving us this, what can you give us? And we always expect a better rate. There is always something to get from them, and they're always in there, and they're always happy to give you a good rate. But my advice is to never go to a bank, and always forward buy if you can, spot buy.
Right, okay.
As I think I've said before, Stefano, this is my biggest problem with buying abroad. It is, as soon as you buy another currency, you're playing the foreign exchange market, and nobody knows the direction of the foreign exchange market. I think that's the biggest risk with buying abroad. You know, if it's a holiday home or somewhere you're going to live, that's different. But if it's an investment, there's a huge foreign exchange risk.
Would you not say though, Paul, there that you generally talk about being in a good location, good amenities, etc., etc., etc. If it's somewhere that's performed well in that respect and is a kind of solid location, would you not say that helps?
You're right, but my point is that regardless of all of that, even if the property increases in value substantially, if the foreign exchange moves against you, that can wipe that out completely.
Right.
You know, I think I used an example in a previous episode where, 10 years ago, the Australian dollar was quite strong. And obviously a lot of overseas people, especially Chinese people, bought in Australia. And the Australian dollar's tanked since then. You know, if you go back 10 years, I think the Australian dollar was stronger than the US dollar. And now it's about 60 cents on the US dollar. So huge change there. So even if the value of your property's increased by 50%, you haven't made a cent because the Australian dollar's fallen. Another, because I'm constantly transferring money overseas. I'm obviously from Australia originally. Another great site that the best site I've found for transferring money overseas is TransferWise.
Yeah, but transfer, be careful, Paul, be careful. TransferWise is not all it says it is. It isn't, and I've got lots of clients who over the years have used TransferWise or wanted to use it. TransferWise has hidden costs and other things that, you know, is not clear. And this is why I say don't use people like TransferWise. Certainly don't use, the other thing I'd say to you is don't use people like Western Union. I mean, some people over the years have tried to use Western Union. Western Union is fraught with danger in all sorts of ways. But TransferWise, you know, I'm very strong about this point. TransferWise is not all that it seems to be.
And
in doing my research, rates-wise and cost-wise, I've found that to be the best.
What do you think of Currencies Direct, Stefano?
I mean, well, Currencies Direct, Tor FX is a subsidiary of Currencies Direct, so yeah, absolutely brilliant. So no problem. They are owned by Currencies Direct. Currencies Direct, we've used. I mean, you imagine that as lawyers, international lawyers, we get inundated literally every week. We must have 5 or 6 calls from new FX traders wanting our business. We can't go with everyone because we're not that big, so we don't have that much business to give them. And this is why we stick. But over the years, we've used the big ones like Money Corp, Currencies Direct, and all the others. What they do is young kids, they go and train with the big ones. They then think they've got the knowledge, and they go and set up either on their own or with other people who sponsor them and joint venture them. One thing that's good now is that they all have to be FCA regulated. So in the good old days,
that's good.
They didn't have to be FCA regulated, and they used to get away with all sorts of bits and pieces. I mean, we used to deal with one that used to have an office in Dubai, and they used to be up to all sorts of things. And when we realized that they weren't as honest as they should have been, we just cut them straight away. But now they are regulated. So you are protected. As a consumer, you are protected to the extent that the FCA can protect you in as much as it can. And they have to go through resistance tests and risk tests and all the rest of it, you know, and they have to almost put up money to safeguard the users. But you know, shop around. It's like everything.
Yeah.
Go around and shop around. Take 2 or 3 options and see what what they all do for you.
And definitely make sure, like you say, that they are FCA regulated as well.
Oh, well, they can't trade. They can't trade unless they are FCA. Always look at their website and challenge them. You know, like you challenge every other professional. Challenge them. You know.
Can I just say the other thing? I'm very, very pleased that we've got Stefano on board for when we're likely to get sued now for saying what we've said today. and the great thing is, free legal bills, Paul. We'll be all right.
Everything. Just be careful. Everything I say,
yes,
is backed up by fact and is what's called justifiable comment.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Interesting comment as well, I have to say, because it's nice to know what the professional thinks of different things like that. Okay, let's move on to John's next question.
Yes.
John, I'm looking to demolish a garage and take a tree down, which are both in a conservation area. Is there a problem doing anything in a conservation area without permission? One question I have here is, he doesn't say whether it's his land or it's just a conservation area. So.
Well, let's hope it's definitely his land, shall we?
Okay, let's hope it's
his
yeah.
land. So absolutely, in a conservation area, I always describe it as almost like, you know, like you have a listed building where you need permission, the grade 2 to do anything within reason, really, these days. I always think conservation area is almost the same equivalent of that, but for the whole area you're in. And of course, if you're in a conservation area, it's because it's got some historical importance, or they want to keep it looking very much the same and all the rest of it. So there's a reason why it's a conservation area, and probably it's a nice area, and probably you're paying a bit extra to live in that area as well. So basically, anything you want to do in a conservation area, whether it's taking a tree down, whether it's demolishing anything, you need to get permission. You need to get permission. Please, please, just don't go and do it. You'll be fined.
Who
Sorry?
From?
From the local authority. So you need to talk to the local. They might say, look, that's absolutely fine. We'll give you a letter saying, you know, whatever. But you must contact them and you mustn't do it. I very stupidly, many years ago, I took a cherry tree down in order to try and get planning permission on a bit of land.
Poor sad. Very sad for the cherries involved.
Well, there is a good end to the story. Apart from the fact I nearly got fined £20,000 for doing it. It was a pure mistake because it was in a conservation area, and I never realised at the time I needed to. And not many people know that you have to. I mean, it was just a very modest tree. So when I realised the mistake I'd made, I replanted 3 or 4 trees. There you go, you see.
Aww,
and
I'm happy
thank you. and I got away with a £2,000 fine instead of 20,000. But that 20,000 now I think is a lot more. So please be very, very careful. It's very, very serious.
And if there is a tree, let's say, that you wanted to chop down, or something that you'd like to change, and the local authorities say that they don't want you to do that, is there any negotiation there? Is there any leeway usually?
Well, I would say that if the tree is in poor condition, the tree expert at the council, they're pretty sensible. They might say, well, you can take it down, but you need to replant, 2 more, something like that. So they are quite sensible. So if you talk to them, they are sensible. They're not too silly about it. And I would just talk to them. First of all, talk to them, and then they'll advise you what you need to do or not do.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, John. Okay, let's go to Paul's first question for today. Due to COVID-19, do you think the government will support the housing market going forward by reducing stamp duty at all?
Good question.
Yeah. So there's obviously been speculation around this. Even prior to COVID-19, there was speculation about them winding back the 3% stamp duty premium. I believe that is because they raised quite a lot more money than they expected from that policy. So there was already speculation about potentially in the most recent budget, that being one of the changes. Of course, it wasn't. But I think it's quite a sensible change, or at the very least, we're getting lots of stimulus at the moment and lots of holidays on various things. I think a good way of stimulating the property market that's obviously very much been on hold and still is kind of on hold in some ways, would be to potentially give a 12-month stamp duty holiday, or you don't pay stamp duty for the next 12 months, or something along those lines, would be a good way of stimulating transactions. It would give people more reason to make property transactions, or at the very least, as I say, getting rid of or changing the 3% buy-to-let, or it's not buy-to-let, it's subsequent property purchase premium. It's not specific to buy-to-let, the 3% stamp duty premium. It's just if you already own a property, as Stefano rightly said earlier, anywhere in the world, you pay an extra 3% on your on subsequent purchases. So I think it would be a sensible change. For me to say whether I think the government's going to do it or not, I don't have a crystal ball. John perhaps got a little bit more insight to that than I, but I think it would be a sensible change.
What are your thoughts on that then, John?
This government have not shown any sign of supporting landlords or investors, particularly so far. We are in unprecedented times. I think they'll see how the property market reacts to what's happened. And one thing I would say about the Boris government is they'll be brave enough to do things where they've already proved that. They'll be brave enough to do things if they need to. My issue with it is that they need to raise as much tax as they can going forward. And stamp duty is a very easy way for them to raise the taxes. I'll be surprised if we see any movement in the next 3 months. I think getting to next year, and maybe if the market really slows down, they may look to do something, but they will be relying. That's why they brought us back when they have done, of course, out of COVID. One of the reasons is because the amount of revenue that it raises, stamp duty, is phenomenal. At any one time, there's 400,000 transactions happening. I know some of those are rent lettings as well in the property market. So it's a very, very big business for the government in terms of tax. And of course, you look at their revenues. I mean, no one's been driving cars, so they haven't been getting the petrol revenue, just for one example. And there's massive. They've given everyone they don't have to pay tax this year. We pay it all next year, although my advice is if you can pay the tax this year, just pay it, your tax. Otherwise, all you're doing is building up a problem. And the same with the loans. If you don't need a loan, why take one out in a way? Because next year you're going to have to start paying it back, So it's very difficult. But my view is that they won't jump to reduce any sort of tax initially. They may do if the market starts stalling. They may need to do something.
Okay.
Just a point on that. Home Track published some figures last week on the pent-up transactions in the property market at the moment. And they were saying there's around £85 billion worth of property transactions currently on hold due to COVID-19.
Wow.
So when you tie into that the average stamp duty rate of about
3% probably.
Well, 3 to 5 depending on the property value.
Yeah, we don't all live in London, Paul.
But look, John mentioned about not taking out loans. I don't necessarily agree with that. The bounce back loans at the moment are great. If you've got a business, a limited company, either for your own business or for property investment, so you've got a portfolio of properties through a limited company, the bounce back loans at the moment that they brought out, I think just last week, people are getting those loans within a couple of hours. So it's really straightforward. It's an online application. You tick a few boxes and you've got £50,000 in your bank account a few hours later. It's interest and cost-free for 12 months. And then it's a 5-year loan at 2.5%. No security, no personal guarantees. It's about £1,800 repayments a month from the 13th month onwards, which in my view, especially in the current scenario where cash is king, it's almost madness not to take a loan like that if you can get it.
Paul, people are going to. It's okay for educated, and I don't want to sound dismissive of other people, but for people who can take a loan out, it's very tempting if you can get the business loan. I accept that totally, but when you start having to pay back £1,800 a month out of your business, a lot of people won't be able to do that. And I think in the long term, it's okay for smart guys like yourself and other people. I understand that. The other thing I'd say, it's a little bit like my wife, who says to me, darling, I bought that, I'm just going to buy that dress. And you go, why do you need another dress, darling? She said, well, it's 50% off. Yeah, but it's still expensive if you don't need the dress in the first place. Of course, every lady needs a new dress, of course.
But why would why would she not need a new dress?
John,
Well,
evidently you can't manage your wife's affairs. You need to cut all her credit
luckily,
cards
my wife
up
has her
into
own money. She can sort her own affairs.
And I was going to say as well, if it's her money, she can spend it on what she wants.
Exactly, but of course, I do like to contribute.
Of course. Well, then you can add the 25% and you go 50-50.
Well, we don't do 50-50. I normally.
I think this is a discussion for another time.
Yes, possibly.
I'm just giving you an example. If you don't need it, there's no point taking it. That's all I'm saying.
You don't need it because you're so rich.
I don't know whether that's a good example. You know, that you might need a dress for all kinds of occasions. Right.
John always looks good in a dress.
It's always, but you've got to pay it back, and that's the key.
Next episode, everyone's going to wear a dress. Right. Stefano, we've got some fan mail for you here.
Oh, yeah.
Stefano, I'm a big fan of yours, as we all are here.
You want money then?
Yeah.
And I would love to know, what is the most challenging legal situation you've ever had to deal with a property abroad?
That's an interesting question.
I've had a few over the years. I think one of the most challenging is dealing with a property or a series of properties in southern Italy, where certain people of ill repute were involved, and having to negotiate terms and having to extricate English clients from purchases that they had made in the south of Italy, and organized crime. So we had to use intermediaries and mediators and all sorts of other events that can't be discussed online to get people out of very difficult situations. I mean, apart from that, there have been situations where people have bought with their eyes closed, and it usually boils down to the same thing: people not having done the proper due diligence, people not having done the proper investigations, people thinking, in one case, English lawyer who thought he knew it all, doing everything wrong, and then coming back to me some months later and saying, got it wrong,
sorry,
I accept I got it wrong, can you help me? And I charged him 10 times what I would say it'll cost you 10 times more to come back to me the second time than it would do to instruct me initially. There are all sorts of things that have happened. It depends which locations. I mean, we've had loads of problems in Egypt over the years, and Turkey, and countries which are third world countries, Northern Cyprus. We've had all sorts of things, titles not being owned by people who said they owned them and selling them, people buying property from people purportedly owning them. And one of the biggest problems we've ever had was one case where, and I think I've alluded to this in another episode, where the land was owned by one person or entity and the property built on it was owned by another. The people bought it and then found that they were being held to ransom by the freeholder, as it were, the person who owned the land underneath the house, and having to extricate them from that. But you know, we've had all sorts over the years. I don't think there's many situations I've not encountered either on an off-plan build. We've done loads of off-plan in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Egypt, and those in Northern Africa especially bring with them a series of consequences and problems that perhaps English people are not ready for, and that we as international law specialists know about and always warn people about beforehand.
So Stefano, obviously I know you can't talk about the details of it, but when you say you had to use intermediaries in terms of the I don't know, like gangs or mafia or whatever you want to call it, that is that a case of paying somebody, the client would have to pay somebody off then? How does that work?
Well, it ended up that we had to involve the Italian police, the anti-mafia police, and they negotiated at the highest level with certain groups, certain members of certain families, and it ended up that no, in the end, it didn't end up that our clients had to pay any more money. What was happening was that these groups in the south of Italy, in Calabria, were putting up for sale on imaginary websites. And this is why I always say to people, if you can't touch it and kick it and it doesn't hurt you when you kick it, it's not there, as far as I'm concerned. And when you see glossy websites, it's not always the case that what you see is true. So what happened was that they were taking photographs, would you believe, of stuff that had been half built, had been left for 15 years. And what they'd done is they had re-imaged and CGI'd the images of these buildings, and they were selling them purportedly as new builds and ready, finished, and this, that, and the other. And these people hadn't even gone out there. They just put the money into this pot and continued paying for stage payments and all the rest of it. Wow. And at the end of the day, there was nothing there. Well, there was.
Unbelievable, isn't it? What some people will do. I mean,
well, it's what I'm saying. You know, in England, you wouldn't buy something from Paul, you know, unless you actually go and see the drawings, and unless you've got evidence that he exists or he's going to exist, and you've got the backups and the guarantees. These people were being led on by a group of Italo-Spanish. It was an Italian and a Spanish exercise, and they just poured money into. They'd been conned by the literature, and they'd put money into this pot, and it then became a huge multi-million-pound scam. Which was evidenced in court cases in England as well, because there was an Italian law firm that was involved in London, and we were onto the Law Society and the SRA and all sorts of other things. It became a mafia big thing, and they were closed down in England. Became the subject matter of indemnity insurance claims to millions and millions of pounds against this Italian law firm, and you know it became an absolute nightmare.
And how were the properties being marketed? Was it just a website and people kind of came across the website and then just bought them?
What they did was they built a proposed show house in one of the villages down in southern Italy, and they'd taken people out to show them what was going to happen, and people had taken that on board and said, right, okay, on the basis of these plans and this show house, it's going to happen, and nothing else.
There's lots of overseas properties off plan, that sort of thing, that are marketed that just look too good to be true. And I think that's a good sort of rule to live by. If it looks too good to be true, definitely. It probably is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Well, that's why you need a good lawyer like us.
You know what, right, Stefano? It's absolutely essential. Absolutely essential.
But people, John, you say that. People don't understand that. People think that we are taking money as an international law firm. We're taking money for not doing anything. And when I say I had a guy ring me up yesterday who wants to buy an agriturismo, which is an agricultural property in northern Italy, in Umbria. And he said to me, well, tell me, I mean, are you a solicitor? Yes. What do you do? How can you help me? How can you do it? And I spent half an hour almost justifying myself. I find myself, or we find ourselves as lawyers, trying to justify the services that we can do.
And that shouldn't be the case. That's wrong, isn't it? That shouldn't be the case. You know, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
And that does tie back to the point that we made in the previous episode, so far as, conveyancing quite often is kind of commoditized now. And you have these sausage factories that pump out conveyancing advice.
Yeah.
But as you say, you're far better off paying a few hundred extra pounds to get good advice than just a template.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with the very best people you can find.
Sound of like we're doing here, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right.
We've got another question here this is to everybody. So we'll go through everybody's answers. If it wasn't property, what did you think that you were going to do growing up, and what made you change your mind?
I was going to become a Formula One driver and drive for Ferrari.
Brilliant. Why Ferrari?
Very good answer.
Why Ferrari? It's the only team. It's the only team to support. I'm potty Ferrari mad. Everything I have.
Have you got a Ferrari?
I had a Ferrari 400i, which was a classic, and I rebuilt it with a friend of mine who was an engineer and learnt all about Ferraris, and then sold it some years ago. I have a Maserati now, which is wonderful, and a Jaguar.
Very good.
Very nice.
Very good.
Very nice. So
you're getting paid too much, Stefano.
What's your answer for that one, John?
I've always been fanatical about football, and as you know, I was the director of Cambridge United for 18 years. And they say every football director is a frustrated footballer, and I wasn't good enough, and I went for trials at different clubs, and my on my school report it said when I was 12 years old, John must understand there's more to life than just football. So there we go. So I wasn't good enough, and then I managed to make some money and become a director. I was a director of Cambridge United at 25, 26 years old, which is very young, but I'm very proud of that.
You didn't originally think you'd be involved in property at all then?
No, I wanted to be I thought I was going to be a professional footballer.
You know, the only reason why he got involved because he thought he could buy the ground and redevelop it for lots of property.
I did buy the ground eventually, you're quite right, but it did take 18 years, and I bought it to save the club and leased it back to them for 50 years. So
there you go.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Paul?
Not too dissimilar to John, actually. I played a lot of rugby when I was a kid, so I always thought I was going to be a professional rugby player. And similar type reports. I went to quite a famous rugby school in Australia called Joey's, and used to fall asleep in class and things because we were training twice a day, every day. So yeah.
Paul, was that league or union?
Union.
Ah, it's the wrong code, mate. League's the only one.
It's the right code, and interestingly, Paul, I played for a Norfolk under 16s, Norfolk County rugby, but they got a bit big for me after that. But of course, what we do forget is that Paul must have done some work at school because he did go on to get 2 degrees. So yeah. He's the most intelligent Australian, basically, there is.
What made you change then from rugby? What was it about property that sort of drew you in eventually?
I wasn't good enough. Property was a fallback.
Okay. Fair enough.
It was a way to catch the girls.
Well,
in saying that, though, a lot of the guys I played with went on to be very successful. 3 of the guys from school went on and played for the Wallabies, and about 5 of the guys from my university team did the same. So
it's good effort, good standard.
Paul, I have a client who is in Adelaide, and he was one of the most famous Australian rules players.
Okay.
I'll tell you his name after we've gone off air.
Yeah, we better keep that a secret for now. Right, guys, thank you so much for all of your contributions today. John Howard, Stefano Lucatello and Paul Mahoney. I've been Lucia France. This is A Question of Property, and if you'd like to email us, please do ask@aquestionofproperty.co.uk, or of course subscribe to any of the channels where you are watching it now. You can always write a comment underneath and we'll be able to see that too. You guys have all got your own channels, right?
Yeah, we all got on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So just let us know that way. We hope you've enjoyed watching today's episode, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.